Hey, Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. Good to be here. Good to see
I know
you.
we always host these 11 a.m. live in Crappy Professionals, but I believe you're a little ahead of us. And what is it? About 1 in the morning where you're at?
Yeah, Tokyo, Japan Standard Time, just one straight up.
No, I once again appreciate you staying awake. And for everybody listening, Mike Grant is the co-founder of DevilCraft Brewing all the way in Tokyo, Japan. It's a pleasure to have him today. And we spend so much time in Crappy Professionals talking about the current state of craft beer in America. But Mike is in a very unique situation. He's been in the Japanese craft beer scene for quite some time now. We're excited to hear about his experiences. Now, Mike, as I was doing a last minute preparation to kind of learn a little bit more about you and what you do over there, I was Googling DevilCraft last night and I
Mhm.
stumbled upon a nearly 4 minute long commercial with the most delicious deep dish pizzas. And it kept going back and forth from cheese, meat, cheese, even more meat. And the commercial just last night at like 11 p.m. my time made me so hungry. So it looks like you have an amazing product. But before we get into that, I want to learn a little bit more about you. Now, I know you were born and raised in California. Can you talk a little bit more about your early years and what you did prior to going abroad?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Marin County in San Rafael. And I went to school. I actually lived in the same area my whole life until I left the country. So I was born and raised in San Rafael and went to school, went to high school, went to college in Sacramento, California, and then graduated from college and actually went into business for a very short time. I had a very brief insurance career, about 3 months exactly. And that's all it took for me to find out that that was not what for me. And then I went to Taiwan to teach English over there. A friend of mine had been teaching and he had started an English classroom with a Taiwanese partner, and he was there for a year, and he wanted to finish up, and so he said, "Hey, you want to do this?" I said, "Yeah, I'm ready to get out of the insurance business," and that's how that started.
Now, did you go to school for insurance, or how did you end up working in that field
No,
initially?
no, I studied finance, and so I wanted to do something in the field that I studied, and the the thing that I remember the most about the insurance job was the cappuccinos were good at the place nearby the office. So I had a feeling this really wasn't for me, and decided to move on. And I had also before I started the insurance job, I thought about being a teacher, but I didn't want to go back and get my teaching credential at the time, and so I figured the move to Taiwan and teaching English over there, and also seeing Taiwan would be a good opportunity, and it was.
Now, you mentioned you pretty much stayed in California all your young life. Had you traveled a bunch, or was that bug in your family growing up?
No, it's funny. We didn't travel much. We were pretty much a homebound family. The most we camped a lot. We did that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't think I didn't have a passport until I went to Taiwan. So I was definitely pretty much local for most of my young life.
So you had that finance education, you worked in insurance, and your buddy called you up and said, "Hey, I'm teaching English over here in Taiwan. You should come join me." Was it that easy, or what made you just get up and go? And I mean, I've traveled abroad a lot and I love traveling abroad, but to get up and actually move your life to another country, that's the big move.
Well, it would be impossible for me now, but at the time there were a few commitments, and there was no professional reason to stay, and I had a wanderlust because I hadn't traveled much. I really wanted to get out and see what might be out there, and I knew very little about Taiwan or anywhere outside the U.S. to be frank. And so I said, let's give it a shot. And the job was kind of set up. I was going to be able to make a decent living for as long as I stayed, which ended up to be just a little bit over a year. I stayed there.
And were you able to speak the language at all when you first moved?
No, not a lick. And so that made it interesting because it was out in the country, and even in the cities in Taiwan. This is going back in early, it was late '80s, I guess. Um, very few people spoke English, and so uh, you were that was good though, because you were forced to learn the local language, and especially because I was out in the country, it was even more of a, kind of a push to learn the local language.
So, I mean, you were there about a year, correct?
Yeah, just about a year. Yeah. And then back to the San Francisco area for a year.
On a scale of 1 to 10, over the course of that year, how well were you able to actually learn the language to be able to teach others English?
Well, there's one of the things, I don't know how familiar you are with EFL, but basically it helps the native English speaker teachers is basically you only use English in the classroom. So in the classroom, you're fine. It's everywhere outside the classroom that you might run into, this challenge or that challenge.
So, for example, if you were to go out and try to order a beer?
Yeah, well, as I said, it was the country. It was the countryside, so there wasn't a lot to do. There was it was mostly agricultural, and it was sugarcane and rice for the most part. And there was a sugar processing factory out there, and they had an ice cream shop, and that was pretty much where everybody hung out. That was the only hangout place, other than pretty dodgy bars in town that you didn't really want to get involved in. And so you would go out and, you were forced to socialize, because outside of your little English classroom, nobody spoke English. So if you didn't speak the local language, you'd be in for it.
And I guess you were lucky enough to have your friend out there, so you had a little bit of companionship?
I think he and I were there for a few weeks at the most. I have some good memories of that. But then he took off and went on his way. And then I was there, left to my own devices, for better or for worse.
And what made you want to come back to America?
Well, I thought I'd seen it's a very local place, a very rural place, and I'd seen pretty much all I needed to see of that. And I didn't really want to stay in Taiwan, and I figured, well, I had obviously the home base back in the States, and so I came back to the States. It wasn't any job or anything like that was pulling me back, but it was just time to kind of finish up that adventure.
So then you came back to, was it California you came back to, or where did you end up
settling? Yeah, I came back to California, and I think that's going back a while, but I think I lived in San Francisco, or I might have been living in San Rafael at the time, but that's when I worked briefly as a bagel baker.
I mean, who doesn't love bagels? I could start my day with a bagel every single day. It doesn't matter the kind. And I think I'm lucky that my wife just got a bread maker, so fresh bread is always delicious.
Awesome. We have one too. It is.
So, but bagel making, I mean, obviously, you're starting to get in that food world. Had you started home brewing yet, or what intrigued you to make the jump into home brewing?
Not at all started home brewing yet, actually. But just to jump back about the baking, as you get older, you kind of look back a lot, and you realize some of the triggers and some of the things that maybe motivated you later that you didn't realize. But Mom was a real great baker of sweets, Christmas cookies and things like that, and she kind of lit that fire in me, I think, early on. And so I like to bake sweets at a young age, so I was doing that, and I wasn't doing any hardcore baking or anything. But I still enjoy that quite a bit. But no handling at the time.
Do you still make any bagels ever?
No, bagels, it's actually really, it's not impossible. You can make them at home, but if you have the facilities like we had at the bakery, it makes it a lot easier. I mean, because we were dipping in the water, and then you pull them out of the water, and the whole business of putting on these racks and the baking, they're very handmade. So it's a labor-intensive business like brewing.
But as I pick up from your early 20s, you kind of like to move quite a bit and experience new things. I mean, the insurance, teaching EFL in Taiwan, the bagel making. No, did you make bagels for a year, then decide, what? I've got that wanderlust itching at me again. I need to go somewhere?
Well, the bagel job was a good transitional job, but it wasn't something that I thought I would be doing forever. And it was overnight baking, so that made it challenging. I have had quite a few late night jobs. I worked in grocery store doing the night shift. So, I was a bit of a night owl from pretty early on. And yeah, I never really thought I would make a career of bagel baking, although I still, like pretty much everybody in the world, like making bread.
So you finished your career bagel making, and I know from just reading your bio, you ended up back in Japan. But was that an immediate move to Tokyo, or how did you end up back in that part of the world?
No, so actually, the friend Albert, shout out to Albert, AQ Evolution. He and I, he was the one in Taiwan, and he and I went to high school together. But he sort of left me the English classroom in Taiwan, and then we came together to Japan in '91. And when we got to Japan, we knew it was going to be a really crazy experience because we were in the line to go through immigration, and we looked behind us, and it was Hulk Hogan or Jesse Ventura. It was one of those two. I can't remember which of the two, but it was like we looked up and it's like, hey, and he's like, hey. It's really that kind of experience, but it only got weirder after that. But so we got into Japan, and then he went.
Hogan or was it Jesse Ventura you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I still don't know who it is because I kept saying that the governor of Minnesota, and they're like, no, that was the other guy. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I think Hulk Hogan had a short-lived maybe idea to go into politics at one point in his life.
Was that Hulk? Okay.
I don't know. It's irrelevant.
So anyway, the friend and I, he went to kind of northeast Japan, and I went to Kyoto. So I lived in Kyoto for a year and a half or so, and he lived in North Japan for a year and a half. And teaching English, both teaching English in different places at that time.
And at that time, homebrewing technically still illegal in Japan, correct?
Yeah, actually, even now, sadly, it's still illegal. I think the law says anything over 1%, which is pretty much anything that is beer, is illegal to brew. But yeah, we still, at that point, that was 91, and we weren't brewing then, but we were always looking for good beer because he and I, and people of our generation from the States obviously had been introduced to good beer through Anchor Steam in Sierra Nevada, and also more closer to home, Lagunitas and Marin Brewing in Moylan's, who were actually pretty close there in Marin County. But over here, there wasn't anything. There was good beer from Kirin and Asahi and Sapporo, but it was kind of bland. And when we wanted something good, we'd have to bring it over from the States. Really, there wasn't even anything available to purchase at that time.
So if you wanted to go out, you would just have one of the big brands and settle for whatever you could get, it sounds like.
You would. Those were the choices.
Now, what about food those days? I mean, your restaurants and brew pubs now, you serve deep dish Italian, Chicago-style pizza. But when you wanted to go out for something, did you have American options there? Were there any unique options you saw from abroad?
Well, a lot of time passed between the time I was describing just now and since we opened, because we opened in 2011, and that was 91. So that was a full 20 years. But yeah, I was in Kyoto, and I was more interested in immersing in anything Japanese at the time. So I wasn't really on the lookout for it. But there were a few pubs that had, they'd have pub food and Guinness and Kilkenny and things like that. And that was about it on the beer and food side. That was non-Japanese, but obviously, and a lot of that really incredibly tasty Japanese food. There was plenty of that. Wherever you looked, and that was kind of what we were immersing ourselves in when we were here.
And so you kept teaching English. So when in your life did the homebrewing begin?
Well, yeah, so it began quite a bit later. I had been here for 15 years almost, maybe not quite, 12, 13, 14. You kind of lose track after a while. And I went back to I got married and my kids were born. A couple of my kids were born, and we would go back every year at Christmas to see the family in California. And my younger brother is the one who actually got me into homebrewing.
There's always that one person to blame.
Yeah, I never forgive him, actually. But he had learned to homebrew in college, and he's like, hey, brother, I think you'd like this. And he was not wrong.
And so you started, did he bring you to his setup while visiting in California, or did you decide to just invest in the equipment while, in Japan?
It all kind of blurs together, but the first one was unforgettable because it was all of my siblings together, along with my father, doing a homebrew batch right around Christmas time on Treasure Island, because my brother lived on Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay at the time, and that was pretty awesome. And the beer turned out.
You guys all brew together. What kind of beer do you remember?
Vaguely, it was something red and hoppy, but that's about all I remember.
Did you actually get the opportunity to enjoy it, or were you already back overseas by the time it had fermented out?
We were back, but I think he sent me some. Yeah, I have some recollection of having tasted it and being encouraged, like, actually, this is not, maybe we could do this. But yeah, so I got bit by the bug, and then I probably bought $10,000 worth of homebrew equipment.
Oh my God!
In my house now, I haven't. It's in mothballs right now, but yeah, I got way into it, and I was in a pretty good teaching situation where I didn't have a lot of classroom hours, so I had plenty of time to explore and experiment with the fermentation science.
Now, at this point in time, were you in Tokyo, or where were you at exactly in Japan?
At that point, I was in Chigasaki, which is about an hour to the west of Tokyo. Yeah.
Because in your first dive into Taiwan, it sounded like you didn't have a lot of people you were able to interact with, just because you were in the countryside and didn't really know the language very well. But I imagine by this point in time in Japan, you probably picked up the language a little bit, if I had to make a guess.
Yeah, I did. Japanese and Chinese language are both complicated and difficult in the way of the kanji characters, and I'm still not fluent in reading and writing, but in terms of speaking and listening, I can do fine. And yeah, it was just something where I had an ear for language, and it wasn't particularly difficult for me, and it was something that I felt was really important, and so I just kind of pushed it along.
Now, did this give you the opportunity to interact more socially with some of the locals?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're always going to be at a disadvantage, I think, if you don't speak the language. Actually, now in Tokyo, it's pretty easy to have a life without speaking Japanese, but to me, it'd be unfortunate to do that, because there's a lot that you miss, I think.
And as you got further into the local culture, was beer part of the conversation you had with those you met, or was that more something you kept to yourself in your homebrew kitchen?
I introduced it to friends at first, and then some time passed. About 3 or 4 years I'd been homebrewing, and I was making a lot, but it was kind of like, you want to get it out there, you want to connect to people a little bit more, and I was a little bit far out from any kind of community at least that I knew of like-minded people. And so I actually Googled something, and I found a person who ended up to become a connector to the homebrew group that we had, and yeah, that's kind of where that became DevilCraft.
Now, this is where I'm excited to dive in, because in the first couple of emails we had, you referred to yourself as Mookie Brews, and I believe you also referred to your buddy Albert by some kind of code name. Talk a little bit more about these names you have for one another. Is that something you did just for fun, or is it a part of the Japanese homebrewing culture? I'd love to know about that.
No, it was strictly for fun. We had handle names. The homebrewing group that I was part of had an online, I can't even remember what the tech name for it was, but it was an online forum type of thing. that was started around 2008 or 9. And that was just around the time that I had reached out. I saw somebody's name on one of the U.S. homebrewing forums, and his name was Chris. Actually, his handle name was CJ. And I read some of his posts. I thought, he's in Japan. So I reached out to him, and he turned out to be Chris Pohl, who is also opening his own brewery in Chiba and has his pub out there now. And so on that forum, we all kind of had our handle names. And so that's where that came from.
You got to tell us why, though. Why Mookie Brews? Is that a nickname from growing up?
Oh, no. So that was Mookie came from a Spike Lee movie, I think. This is going back a ways, too. I was given the name. I didn't give it to myself. So you'll have to ask Albert about that one. But I think that's where that came from.
I won't ask any more questions about your secret handles there. Interesting. So you're homebrewing. You've got friends in the local community. You've got other people who are, like-minded craft fans. When did it get in your head? And, as a homebrewer myself, you always have that moment like, I think it would be awesome to open a brewery. But you didn't necessarily dive into a brewery. You started with, the pizza place that had Americans craft beer. But when did that idea even get in your head, Mike, that you wanted to, not only keep teaching, but open a business?
Yeah, I liked teaching. I did. I mean, but it was always a means to an end. I don't think it was ever something that I had thought about being a teacher, but it was just something I said, it works out well. And then the situation was good. But I had always also thought that I'd like to have a business of my own. And I'd always liked baking, as I said, and I always liked making things. And so you always kind of have that going in the back of your mind, like, well, maybe, just maybe. But also I had a family. I was around 2008, 2009. By that time I had 3 kids, still have 3 kids.
I was going to ask.
And so, you don't really, you can't just take anything lightly and jump on to it. So it's like that old adage, keep the day job. So I did. I kept the day job. We all kept the day job. But just before we started, we weren't sure how it was going to go. I mean, it went very well ultimately, and looking back on it from 10 years on, but at the beginning, who knows how it's going to go.
What was your wife's reaction when you told her you actually wanted to start this business? She
kind of gave me the Japanese version of keep the day job.
And when she realized you were actually serious?
I got to give her credit. She had lots of questions about it, and as one should. I mean, you don't want to jump into anything. And we had to make ends meet, and it took a lot of, putting this job together with that job and making things happen. But when you have a passion for something, you kind of get energy from that. And she was on board in her own way, and still is.
That's fantastic. I mean, you definitely need the support for your friends and families to make something like this work, especially in your case, in a foreign country. I can only imagine how vital her support was through all of this.
Absolutely. I mean,
so you get ready to open this business, and you had a couple buddies from the homebrew club who joined you. Is that correct?
That's right. So I had reached out to Chris Pohl, who was a pretty well-known home brewer on the U.S. homebrew forums, and actually I think he's credited with creating this hop bursting technique.
Cool.
So he was the conduit, and then I got together with several other like-minded home brewers in the Tokyo area in an English language forum, and there had been an idea or like a dream among members of that forum to open a brewery, and there were certain other individuals involved, but through their family situations or personal situations, they weren't able to do it at the time. And when the time came, when my business partners were ready to move, they were looking for one more able-bodied, like-minded person, and they said, "Hey, how about Mookie?" And so that's how I got the call to the bullpen. And
when they had this vision, did they already plan to do Chicago-style deep dish pizza, or how did that come into the equation?
Well, perhaps in the back of one of my business partners' minds, it might have existed, but I didn't know about it at the time. As a matter of fact, in the early stages, our concept wasn't to have a retail place. It was to have a very small production brewery, and it was going to be out in the countryside where the rents were cheap, and it was going to be a couple of days a week kind of a place, and we would kind of build up from there. But what we heard along the way was that the tax office, which is the licensing authority, was looking more favorably upon applications that had a more realistic sales outlet kind of plan in place. And so we rethought the plan and changed the plan to be more of a brew pub type of a plan.
And at this point, you weren't brewing your own beer, correct?
No, we weren't. No, this is around 2010.
So when you launched, did you launch with a single location, Italian deep dish style, Chicago deep dish style, and American craft beers? That's correct?
That's right. Yeah. So that was 2011. It's just coming up on 10 years right now. That was awesome. 2011 in May. And it was, I don't remember how many taps. I think it was 10 taps at the time. We've increased a little bit since then in that location. It's a funky little building. It's a really small building with 5 stories and quite an old building. We were actually planning to brew on the 4th floor there eventually, but our business got started right after the great earthquake of 2011 here. So that was in March 2011, and there was a huge amount of damage, as everybody knows. And we consulted an architect who told us it was a bad idea to put heavy tanks on the 4th floor of that old building. So we rethought that plan and decided against that brew pub model.
So you were considering putting a brewery on the 4th floor of a building?
Yeah. In retrospect, it was pretty crazy.
It's fairly interesting. You don't hear stories like this much. Now, what floor was the food service taking place on?
Well, it's an interesting building. So you've got the 5th floor is the kitchen, and then there's a dumbwaiter to send the kitchen down to the other floors. And the 4th floor was going to be the brewery, and then the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st floors are all customer floors.
Oh my gosh, quite the building, it sounds like. Very unique operation. If you had put the brewery there, unique even still.
Yeah, it would have been great in a way, but it would have been horrible too. It's just too small. I mean, what we didn't know at the time was all the other things that you need. Where are you going to put the kegs? Where are you going to put the chiller? And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work, but you said they needed able-minded people, and that's why you're there. But so when you started this business, I want to ask you 2 questions first. The tap list that you had when you opened, what types of beers were you serving to the guests who came to visit? And were guests, were you seeing people just rush out to come try the beers you had, or what was traffic like back in those days?
Yeah, so one of our motivations for doing the pizza was there were some places around town where you could buy, you could get a decent craft beer, either imported U.S. or European or domestic Japanese, but there weren't many places that had a kind of a menu item, basic main food item. And so we thought that pizza would work because it's so common in the States. There weren't any places doing pizza and beer over here. And so the idea was to do, our original business plan had regular kind of California style pizza and Chicago style pizza. And by about 3 months in, the Chicago style pizza had so far outpaced the other one that we basically took the California style off the menu. But the tap list was, I think our original plan was to do half Japanese craft and half U.S. import. But our customers, there weren't a lot of imports at the time, and our customers demanded more imports. And so we kind of focused on the imports and said, it made sense, us being American, having a lot of American beer on it kind of was a good sales point, and it still is.
Were there any early favorites you remember having on tap back in those days?
Well, you're going way back. I actually remember some of the Japanese beers. Yeah, that's true, but there's been a lot of beers since then. I remember some Baron beers from up north in Morioka here in Japan were great. We had Sound Brewing from Washington. They were fantastic. Those were some of the early ones. One of the biggest days we had in the first year was Maui Brewing. And so we had a Maui Brewing event. And actually, some years later, Garrett came over and we did an event together. But yeah, so we had quite a variety. Whatever was available through our importer friends, we have on.
And the people were really into the American styles, so that's very cool that you had a place that was offering it.
Yeah, they still are. It's actually there's quite a few importers, and there's a huge number of U.S. breweries that are imported over here in very good condition, cold chain.
Now, for the styles that were popular in Japan at this time, I know probably a lot of pilsners, lagers. What did you see selling domestically?
Well, yeah, that was one of the issues. The Japanese craft breweries at the time, with some notable exceptions, were not making very interesting styles, and were kind of mimicking what the majors were making, and that didn't seem to make much sense to us. And so we decided to, kind of pack our tap list with things that weren't that, and that worked out well with us, especially in combination with Chicago pizza.
So, with your desire to put out innovative flavors, when did you decide to actually, put a production brewery in place as opposed to, putting something on the fourth or fifth floor?
Well, it's funny because we do have a standalone brewery, and the owner of our we actually leased the building. The owner of our building did not want us to have any retail space out of there. But by Tokyo standards, it's really far from any station. So it's a 15-minute walk, which is an unthinkably long walk for Japanese people in Tokyo. And there's no other way to get there. So in our brewery, we brew and we deliver to our pubs by van. Used to be a couple times a week, but now in the current situation, it's about once a week. But yeah.
And currently, how many locations do you have?
So we have 3 direct DC DevilCraft locations, and then we have a 4th DevilCraft location that's a joint venture with a partner. So basically 4 in the greater Tokyo area.
Now, looking at what you've created so far, do you have any styles that you've brewed yourselves that have just been overwhelmingly way more popular than you could ever expect?
And we've had popular beers. We have some beers that are regulars. That's about maybe 10 or 15. And then we have a bunch of other that we bring in. But basically, like a lot of breweries, we brew a lot of IPAs. So we brew an IPA and we brew a non-IPA. It's kind of how our brewing schedule works. And we used to do 2 yeasts at once, but we're only running 1 yeast at a time now. But yeah, IPA is king over here, including the New England styles and the hazies, juicies, and all that.
Now let's talk about the actual service and the experience that the customers have when they go to a brewery. How have your locations been able to stand out? In the United States, with over 8,000 breweries now, so many breweries are also putting out incredible just customer experiences. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do with regards to the interaction with your guests.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something we need to focus more on. That is the lifeblood of our business. Even though we opened the business and the dream was to make a brewery, it actually started as a pizza restaurant, and it's a retail restaurant business, and it is all about customer experience. And it's something that we talk about a lot. Especially, it's difficult because it's a cross-cultural type of business in terms of us, the owners, but also in terms of the staff and the customers. 20 to 30% of our customer base are non-Japanese. And most of those are Westerners, so Americans or people from other Western countries. And so there's a lot of English speakers. So one question is, do you speak to your guests in, Japanese or in English? So that's one. But really, it's making people feel welcome and trying to find out what it is that you can offer them that's going to make them the happiest, because it's a happy business. That's what we're in.
I imagine you have challenges too with regard to education. First off, you talked about do you speak English or do you speak Japanese? But also, when it comes to menus, do you offer the menus in both languages?
We do, yeah. So it's actually, and we've gone to, in a couple of the places at least, we've gone to a QR code menu, because everybody's got a smartphone, and just basically in terms of COVID stuff, it makes more sense. And then we have printed menus for people that would like to have that, but all of our menus are bilingual.
Now, here in the States, everybody's still operating at some reduced capacity. What's the effect of COVID right now on your businesses in Tokyo?
Oh, I was hoping we could get away from this subject, but I knew we couldn't.
Hey, we'll do it really, really brief. I've said the pandemic code word too many times lately. So
yeah, no, actually, no. It's funny and not funny that you mention it, because
you said QR codes first. You gave me the lead in.
True. So no, the state of emergency is slated to come back. So there was a state of emergency here before, and apparently we're going to have that again, but nobody's quite sure what it means. The word on the street is they're going to ask restaurants to close at 8 o'clock instead of the current 10 o'clock, which basically would kill us because the dinner hour is from 7 to 9. So that's kind of what it's looking like over here in terms of the immediate future, but it's all up in the air.
Now, is pizza delivery a thing?
Oh, yeah. So we don't self-deliver, but we are working with a delivery service. And so we've got that squared away at least one of the locations, and we'll probably increase that to other locations. And then we do takeout and other things that we've gotten our stuff together since March or whatever it was. There was a shutdown from early April here, and we started bottling around that time because we had never done any packaging other than for competitions. But we got some bottling going and are still doing that, very small scale and all manual. But yeah, so both takeout of beer and food we're doing.
And have you seen a nice uptick in all of that through the past 10 months?
It kind of goes like you've got this thing where when we're open for eat-in, the takeout goes down. And then when that goes down, the takeout kind of goes up again. So, but the problem is that the takeout and the delivery doesn't anywhere come close to replacing what we lose on the dine-in. So, you talk about that 10%, but it really is something like that for us. It's about 10% max that the takeout can replace what we lose on the eat-in. So we just hope that this horrible situation clears up before too long.
Yeah, it's eventually going to get better. Just, stay positive. It will get better. But, I want to talk about some challenges not COVID related. You've been abroad over half your life now. Looking back on all your time in Japan and even your early days in Taiwan, what are the biggest challenges that you faced as a person, just being an American over abroad trying to get your footing in the world?
Wow, there's been a lot. I mean, the language is, I think, key, and finding somewhere that you fit into that society, and that has a lot of meanings. It could be professionally, it could be personally with relationships, and I think there's a lot of my friends and fellow expats here who are not here for very long, and I actually didn't see myself spending my whole life here, but it kind of has just turned out that way. But the more that the more difficulty that you have kind of fitting in, whatever that means, makes it harder to stay longer, simply put.
Was there a moment in your life where you realized this is now home, and that's when you realized it's where you're going to start your business, raise your family? When did that moment happen for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, the house that I'm sitting in, we bought in 2006, and the business, I was homebrewing at the time, but the business was not even a dream at that point, really. But buying the house and signing off on the loan, that pretty much kind of convinced. Actually, before buying the house, I had been back to the States on a solo tour, kind of with an eye to moving the family back to the U.S. And I took a solo driving tour around the Western states, and there was only a couple places that I thought my family and I could be happy in. And of course, you're only there for a few hours. You're probably wrong, but the kicker was my wife's English. We would need to be a double income family, and we weren't going to be able to live in the Bay Area where my family's from because of the housing prices and so on. And so it just kind of was a process of elimination of where does it make sense. And so when I came back from that trip, we talked a lot and decided that, yeah, we'd stay in Japan for now. And then later that year, we bought the house, and that was about 15 years ago.
And it's been home ever since.
It has, and probably for quite a bit longer.
Now, how often do you come back to the States to visit any family?
Well, like I said, when the kids were little, it was about once a year. And then we would come back, my business partners and I would come back for the Craft Brewers Conference every year. So it was once a year when the kids were little, and then once a year later when DevilCraft started. So about once a year until this. I think the last time I was back was 2019 at some point.
And do you plan to come back during Safer Times to the conference?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, then we'll definitely be sharing a beer next time we're in the States together.
Definitely.
So when you come back to America, is there anything that just kind of blows your mind or doesn't make sense to you? It could be just the brewing trends going on here. It could be just something experience related. Is there any kind of culture shock you feel coming back to the United States?
Well, I'm American, and I'll die American. But, living abroad, you get a certain perspective, and a lot of my long-term expat friends over here, we don't understand a lot about America now. It's baffling what has become of America in some ways, and because of our distance, it's easy for us to talk about that in a kind of dispassionate way. I have incredible kind of reverse cultural weird moments when I go back to the States. But so now mostly what I go back to the States for is family and beer. So when I keep it to that, it's awesome.
There's not one thing that just blows your mind when you come back, your politics aside?
Politics aside? Well, the beer blows me away. I mean, I would go back to the U.S. just for the beer, that kind of recharge of incredible energy that you get from the beer scene over there. That's something that's still missing over here. It's blooming over here in its own kind of small way, but you just cannot get great beer and find people who are passionate about it on just about every street corner over here like you can over there.
So let's talk about the beer styles for a minute. Like, you've come back to the States, you've tried that beer, you're like, wow, I've never had anything like this before. What's a style you've tried while visiting back in the United States that you've taken overseas to brew yourself?
Well, it doesn't even really take the visits because we get so many good imports, and the imports are some of the newest and freshest stuff. So we brew a lot of New England IPAs, so we're trying to kind of reverse engineer what a lot of the great breweries are doing over there. And we've had the opportunity to brew collaboration brews with a lot of great U.S. breweries, and so we picked up a lot of good techniques and processes and ideas there. But there isn't really one that blows me away. It's just more like the evolution of the scene over there, which was really interesting for me to see. And to be kind of a part of from a little bit far away.
Now, looking at the other styles being brewed in Japan right now, are there any unique beers that you've tried recently that are something we wouldn't necessarily see here in the States? We throw the kitchen sink in all the beers, as you know, these days. So, your kitchen sink probably looks a little bit different than our kitchen sink. Are there some ingredients that would kind of just make me just, I don't know, cringe, surprised, intrigued, to say the least?
There are a lot of great ingredients here to brew with. We don't generally focus on that, just because that's not the way that we market ourselves. But we are doing some of it. There's a lot of great Japanese citrus fruits, especially, that do well in beer. And some of them are a little bit overused, but nothing really mind blowing. I think that's one of the differences, that U.S. beers tend to be over the top in both a good and a bad way, and Japanese beers tend to be less so, understated in terms of alcohol and also in terms of flavor components.
No, that's fascinating. So what do you have brewing next?
Well, we were just talking about that because we're brewing a wheat beer, and we wanted to use some more local ingredients. And right now, winter season, mikan, a kind of mandarin orange, and yuzu. A lot of people use yuzu. We're actually thinking of combining the two and making a combo wheat beer with those two Japanese fruits, which I think would be pretty good.
No, that sounds fantastic. Now, is your beer, exported at all back to the States these days?
No, actually, we've sent some to competitions, but yeah, we're a 3.5 barrel system, so we don't have a lot of a spare beer. But we were actually thinking of sending some back. We've got some kegs that we want to unload, and so if we've got anybody over on the other side who wants to buy some 30-liter kegs, we can send some of our beer over in those.
Yeah, I'll gladly connect you to Mike. Now, looking at the future of DevilCraft, I mean, when you first launched the brand, did you have plans of having multiple locations, or is that something that just said, well, this one's really successful, let's put another, then a production brewery? How much of this was planned versus natural progression?
Yeah, natural progression for the most part. I mean, the brewery was always the goal, and we hit the goal. So we actually got 2 locations going before we got the brewery going, and then 2 going after we got the brewery going. But the goal was always to get the brewery going.
So what's next? Are there more on the horizon, or what's in the plans for DevilCraft?
Well, kind of for now, it's just to get to the other side like everybody else. We were able to access a loan in the middle of last year when things got pretty dark. And that should carry us, depending on how long this drags out, that should carry us through this year. And so we really are kind of on hold about plans, but I think there is expansion in the works. We'd like to get to some of the other big cities in Japan. I think there would be a demand for our product and a combination of what we offer in some of the other big cities, because there isn't at the current time.
Now, how many microbreweries are there in Japan right now?
As a word, you can ask me the tough questions, but I looked.
Well, I did my research as well, but I'll let you be the expert.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. The last time I looked at it really closely was 2019, yeah. And I quizzed my business partners about it. I said, how many breweries have opened this year, or how many breweries per week or something? And it was like in 2019, it was a new brewery every 4 days, which was huge. Wow. For here. Yeah, but there was a low point around 200, but I would guess it's around 400 or 500 now, and it's exploding mostly on the 1 to 3 barrel range, one man operator type. A lot of them in the bigger cities, but there are quite a few in the countryside as well.
I mean, the population of Tokyo is absolutely huge. How many craft breweries do you think you will keep seeing grow? I mean, as the trends get more popular and people like you keep educating the locals on the value of quality craft beer, do you see its market that's on the rise still?
The market's definitely on the rise. I mean, to think about, certain benchmarks of getting to 10% share of beer or 20% or whatever, that's a little bit more difficult here because of the complications of the drinks market here, including not only alcopop or whatever that segment is called, and other beer, wine, spirits, etc., etc., and of course Nihonshu sake. So there's a really diverse drinks and alcohol market here, but I do think it's going to grow, and it's mostly growing on that really small side. I don't know that we have the potential to get that extreme share. I'm hopeful that we'll keep increasing share, and the big boys are taking notice, and the Kirins and the Asahis are now also in this game, in the crafty game.
Interesting. Now, have your kids at all gotten in the craft beer industry alongside you?
Well, we kind of took a European style of raising the kids in terms of we'd let them dip their fingers in the beer when they were little, my son, who's now 20, he could pinpoint an IPA 15 years ago. He's 5 years old. And that's an IPA, but he hates beer now. So I'm hoping that. No, I'm unfortunate. I'm hoping that he turns around. My other son is about to enter the Navy. Oh, he's actually in California, and so he's going into the service. And my daughter is still 16, so she's not too into it. But they're more into my baked goods rather than my brewed goods.
Well, everybody likes to eat. Now, you've been doing this for a while now. You said 10 years of DevilCraft. That's awesome. When do you celebrate that anniversary?
Well, I hope we're at a point in July. It would be July of 2011, so July of 2021. So we're coming up about 6 months away. And I hope we're at a point this summer where in some way, shape, or form, we can do a nice celebration with our fans and our community of regular customers.
Assuming you're able to have some sort of event, what will that entail?
Well, we actually did one small event at the brewery. Even though the brewery is not a retail location, we had an open brewery event where we invited, it's about 30 guests at a time, and it's mostly outdoors. And we tried to do it in the most responsible way possible. I think in the worst case scenario, we do something like that at the brewery. I'd prefer to do it at the place itself where we opened, but we're not necessarily in control of that.
Well, early congratulations either way. I'm sure you'll do something amazing either way.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to it.
Looking at those 10 years, though, why do you think you've made it this long? Obviously, you make a good beer. You have delicious deep dish pizza. But what has been your key to success to make DevilCraft, so successful?
Well, I think that early on, we're super concept strong. There was nothing like what we brought to the market at that time. And we had absolutely no experience in restaurants. So it was a real shit show, to be honest, in terms of customer experience early days. But because people couldn't get the pizza or beer anywhere else, it was actually okay. But that's all right when you're the only game in town, but that changes over time. And I think our expectations of what we should be changed. So we needed to get better operationally, which I think we have. And there's always room for improvement. But it's a really tough question to answer. But I think early days it was concept strong. And I think now, and maybe the one thing that I would say that carried us from then until now is the passion. And I did a Zoom with another beer friend of mine recently, and they asked, what's the difference between craft beer and beer? And I said this long-winded answer about quality and blah, blah, blah. And he said, it's passion. And I said, oh, shit, I lost again. So, because passion connects to story and it connects to humanity. And that's, I think, what people are looking for. Anybody can buy a beer anywhere if you're just looking for a beer. But if you want something a little bit more connecting to that story, the passion of the people that make the story is really what drives it. And I think we had that. And I hope that one thing that's come out of this horrible situation is we got to rethink, why are we in this? And we had to go back and we had to go get a lot of debt. And I even put my house on the line, and it's actually pretty serious business, but you just want to do it. It's worth doing, and it's worth sharing with people that you're doing it with and doing it for. And it's that passion, that just commitment and passion.
Yeah, that passion is absolutely contagious. I love just your energy right there. That's fantastic. Now, through all this, all your time in Japan, you still teach English as a foreign language, correct?
I do.
And how has that changed for you? I know you briefly mentioned that you might have incorporated a little bit of the beer side in your English lessons.
Oh yeah, yeah. I recruit my students. The only problem is I only have one class left, and they're all relatively elder, even to me. And so one family from that class are they've become craft beer fans. So I've succeeded with at least two there, and others are big cheerleaders of DevilCraft and of its success, and I thank them for that. They don't actually drink much themselves, but that's okay. There's all kinds of supporters.
No, I absolutely love it. I mean, it's taken us this far into the conversation to talk about community. It sounds like you've built a strong network of great people who just, really believe in you, support you, and just appreciate everything you're doing. You've had quite the journey over there, and I absolutely love how now some of your students are just advocates for what you do. And I absolutely love how you brought the craft beer into the classroom.
Yeah, I did. Well, I really had no choice. I had to.
No, Mike, I really appreciate you sharing your story today. It's been inspiring. I think it will motivate anyone, whether abroad or in the States, to just keep pursuing that dream. And I definitely look forward to sharing a beer, maybe even a DevilCraft beer next time you're in the States. So,
well, I certainly hope we can, Andrew, and I appreciate your time. And I'm glad that we could have this talk today.
well, cheers. I hope you get a little rest tonight. I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye. Cheers.
Cheers. Kanpai.